Hello and welcome everyone to this past marathon open source. We are excited you could join us today for Paul Turley and Mike Carlo's session. This past marathon features back-to-back live webinars delivered by expert speakers from the past community. The sessions will be recorded and posted online after the event. You will receive an email letting you know when the recordings are available. My name is Ronen Arieli. I am Microsoft MVP. I serve as a senior consultant and I lead the PAS Hebrew virtual group. If you require technical assistance, please type your request into the question pane located on the right side of your screen and someone will assist you. The question pane is also where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation. Once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, we will go over the questions. You are able to zoom in on the presentation content by using the zoom button located on the top of the presentation windows. Please note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session which will pop up in your web browser after this session ends. Your feedback is really important for us for future events, so please take a moment to complete this. Visit PAS.org and check out all the free educational resources available to PAS members. This PAS marathon session is presented by Paul Turley and Mike Carlo. And without further ado, here is Paul and Mike with, can you say Charticulator? I knew you could.
All right, Ronan, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. Just as a side note, Ronan and I have actually been working together in the community for several years. This is the first time we've actually had a chance to meet. We've been working in the TechNet Wiki Guru program as judges, and he is moderator. And I want to thank Mike Carlo for joining me today. Just very quickly, we've been in the MVP program and have been involved with Power BI and business intelligence technologies and products for many, many years. And it's just a pleasure to talk to you today and share the things that we're really excited about. I'm a principal consultant with Pragmatic Works. I've been an independent consultant, been part of the Microsoft community for, oh gosh, 15, 20 years, depending on what you count. And I'm just really excited to be here and talk to you about things that I'm really passionate about. Mike, I'll give you a couple minutes to introduce yourself.
Yeah, no problem. Name's Mike Carlo. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, got my MBA and master's in data science that I'm kind of working through right now. I'm the owner of PowerBI.tips, the website. So if you've visited the website, that's kind of where I blog and put all my content. Part of what you'll see today is some of the work that we've been doing with custom visuals and how we leverage those inside Power BI desktop and in the Power BI service. So I'm very passionate about all things data. It's kind of it's my shtick. It's what I do, and everything I do and share to the community is through the Power BI Tips website. So we're excited to present to you some really amazing tooling that Microsoft has produced, and we've kind of enhanced over the years, and to make this a really good Power BI experience for you.
All right, thank you, Mike. All right. Well, let's talk about Power BI visuals. We go back in time very quickly and kind of talk about where Power BI came from. Power BI actually evolved out of the SQL Server product stack, particularly out of both SQL Server analysis services and reporting services and SSIS to some degree. But long ago, a group of folks on the Microsoft Reporting Services product team created an interactive visualization experience using Silverlight at the time, which was called Project Crescent. And it was really intended to be a user-driven self-service kind of, point and click, very easy to kind of explore data as you go. And that evolved into Power BI standard visuals. So today, as you work with Power BI, if you're just getting started with Power BI, you'll know that there are about 30 or so visuals that are just baked into the product. And against a data model that you've imported, whether it's important cache data or direct query data, you have a data model that you work with, and you can visualize that data using a variety of standard charts, tables, and other visuals. And and that's great. The out-of-the-box visuals are a really, really good interactive experience. But about 5 years ago, they actually took part of their code base and they published it out in the open source community, put it in GitHub, did some documentation around it, published an API and a service layer that will allow programmers to create their own custom visuals. And typically the person who creates a custom visual is going to be a seasoned C# programmer. They're going to know their way around not only the .NET framework and .NET programming techniques, but they're going to understand REST APIs, they're going to understand JavaScript. And it's not something that you throw together in a weekend. Folks that I know who have done serious custom visual design, generally speaking, you're talking about days to weeks to prototype. You're talking about weeks to actually build something. Then you're going to debug and test and go through a pretty standard application development life cycle. And it's weeks to months to really get something to market. So there really is a great divide between using standard visuals and building custom visuals. It's awesome that we have this ability to create custom visuals, but it's not something that everyone can do, and it's not always cost effective. So enter a project by Microsoft Research called Charticulator. It is a no-code tool that allows you to use a web-based design tool to drag and drop and create a custom visual using detailed properties. It compiles and exports to a custom visual file and produces a boatload of JavaScript as well as JSON structures and metadata. And I'm going to show you how to use that. We're going to get started playing with Charticulator. So it is a Microsoft Research project, and that means that although it is officially created by Microsoft, use it at your own risk. However, there is nothing in the code that Charticulator generates that wouldn't be supported otherwise by Power BI. And you can literally create some wicked cool visuals with Charticulator. The project is managed by these folks at Microsoft Research. If you go and look at the bios of the 3 people up at the top who lead the team, they all have PhDs after their name. These are some pretty smart folks, pretty capable folks who have done a lot of great stuff. And Charticulator actually sits on top of some JavaScript libraries, well-known, very modern libraries like TypeScript and D3 in particular. So, basic chart types. I'm not going to walk through all of the different things that you can do with Charticulator, but there is just a lot of crazy stuff that you can do with Charticulator that will take you well beyond standard visuals. And I'm going to show them some of them to you. So some concepts. If you don't remember anything else today, some basic concepts that you need to understand are the idea of a mark. A mark is the smallest unit or object that you use in Charticulator that you can bind to data, manipulate properties, height, width, size, color, categorization, etc. And that can be a shape like a rectangle or an oval or a circle or a line. You can use your own graphics to create infographics, and you can bind text and manipulate text as well. That's a mark. We also have the concept of, and there are a bunch of other things that I'm not going to get into, but you'll see as I demo the product. Guides, axis grids, links. I'm going to show you these things. And then we have the concept of a glyph, and a glyph is the thing that you put marks into, and it becomes this container that you can control and then repeat over and over again into another object called a plot segment. So mark, glyph, and plot segment. Remember those 3 things. Everything else is kind of icing on the cake. I'm going to walk you through this process, so I'm not going to talk through these slides just in the interest of time so that we can get moving. I'm going to start with something really, really simple. This is a real need that I had on a client project. We had a requirement to create this very simple bar chart that you see here. And it literally was just 2 measures with a bar bound to each measure, and then we wanted to see the length of those bars or the width of those bars relative to each other. And even though that's a very simple thing, you can't do that with Power BI out of the box. I had to jump through some hoops and do some creative things like we often do. I won't go into that technique. It was doable, but it wasn't an out of the box experience. And so this was my design experience, which I'm going to jump into and demonstrate to you. And let me just jump over to Charticulator, and first I'm showing you the implementation that Mike has created on the Power BI tips site. But let me jump over to the actual Charticulator site. As long as you can spell or say Charticulator, you can find it. It literally is charticulator.com, and that takes you to this Microsoft research site. Now there is a gallery of some videos and some helpful information. It is a bit lightweight. There is some good information to get you started, but it's not real deep. And that's where I think Mike and Seth and his group have kind of taken this to the next level. But I'm going to launch Charticulator, and you can see that since this is sitting in a browser instance that is bound to or associated with my Microsoft account, I actually have a bunch of assets that I've created here before. Now, I'm just going to go to New. I'm going to jump over to Power BI Desktop, and let's start with this guy right here. Now, the Charticulator Designer does not have the Power BI data modeling engine behind it. And so what we need to do is actually feed it CSV files that we can use for designing our visuals. And then once you've designed and then you export that to a PBI viz file, then you can actually bind that to your own data within Power BI Desktop. So that's what I've done here. You can see I just have two measures, really simple stuff. And I'm going to use the ellipsis menu up here, and I'm going to export that data to a CSV file. Now I've already done that, so let me just do a quick cooking show demo and jump over to my browser, and I'm going to say I want to go find that file. So there's my exported data, and that's my two measures right there. That's the CSV file that just has the two measure values in it. So I'm done with that. And now I'm going to add a guide because I want to make sure that as I scale this thing, as I resize it, that the height and width of my bars are always going to be predictable. So I'm just going to grab a vertical scale, stick that right there. It happens to work by default with 4 lines here, so that makes it nice and convenient for me. I'm also going to put an axis scale right here. Now, this is what we call the glyph editor. And the glyph, again, is this kind of the small unit that gets repeated. In this very simple version, I'm not going to repeat it. We're really going to just have one instance of a glyph. Now I'm going to draw, and before I do that, let's grab my measure 1. I'm going to drag and drop that onto the axis scale. You can see that it puts a little placeholder down here. Did the same thing with my second measure. And again, it puts this little placeholder. And those are bindable objects. So as I draw a rectangle, you can see that from that little orange dotted line, that the right edge of this rectangle actually gets bound to that field value. I'm going to do the same thing with another rectangular mark, and that snaps to that orange line, and that's now bound. I'm going to pop out the glyph editor so they have a little.
And while Paul's talking about this, one additional point here to note about the glyph editor is every time you see those little green dots, so Paul has made a square, 2 squares there, and everywhere you see a green circle on the corner of those squares, that means you've actually bound it to, it's snapped into place, it's locked into a position that is known by something in the data. So that's why where Paul is talking, when I'm snapping to these 2 different average points on the number scale, those green dots are indicating that this shape is entirely bound directionally in all directions on all points.
Mm-hmm. Now, you can also say that there is a property sheet here. So if you're accustomed to using tools like Visual Studio, this will become kind of a very native experience for you. See that by default it went and kind of chose a range based on the presence of these values. I'm going to set the minimum scale of that range to 0, which makes this a little more accurate. And I'm also going to bind text. Now, just like Mike said, if you watch, there's a little blue dot right there, and I want that to snap to the middle of the right edge of my my rectangle. Now it does draw the that text mark very, very small, and so I have to let me zoom in on that. There we go. Now I can work with that. Now, if we had more time, I would really take a lot of time to resize text and make sure that I place things exactly where I want them. This can take a little trial and error, but out of the box, some good things happen. So I am just going to move those 2 text marks where I want them. Let's make this a white text onto that dark color. I made a point of using dark colors so that it would contrast with the white. Now I'm going to bind my actual field values onto the text property. Now notice that before I let go over here in the property sheet, you can see that all of the blue highlighted what we call attributes, because this is a JavaScript based environment. Every one of those things are bindable. So you can see that much like working with reporting services and other more programmatic tools, you can bind data to lots and lots of things that you can't really do with Power BI. It's not really part of that design experience. All right, now this is where this is going to be a little more of a cooking show demo, because it takes a little time to get everything balanced the way that I want. But after I've built my visual the way that I want it, and I'm off to a good start, I'm not done, but I'm off to a good start here. The next thing that I would do is, one, I'm going to save, and then we'll give this a name. Now, I did learn through trial and error not to have spaces in any of my object or file names. And I'll save that. And once I save it, then I can export it. Now, here in Charticulator, you can export as a few different things. The thing that I really care about is exporting to a custom visual.
That's all we care about, Paul.
Yep. And so I'm just going to give these 2 fields different names. So I'll call this one value 1. I'll call this one value 2. You can see there are a whole bunch of different attributes and properties that I could rename. I am going to give my visual a name. We'll just call this 2 bars, just like we did before. I think I've used that name before, so now I'm challenged with coming up unique names. I've been through this cycle so many times, I can't remember how far I've gotten, but let's say that this is iteration number 12. Now I could put my name in there to take credit. I can put my email address, and then I can export that. Now, and since I'm in Chrome, it goes to my downloads folder. And I'm going to jump back over to Power BI Desktop. And needless to say, I've done this before a few times. So the experience now would be that I click the ellipsis and I say import from file. And then I would go to my downloads folder, or wherever I've put my custom visual files, and I would go grab my 2-measure chart right there. So that's from an earlier iteration. A couple things to note is that because Charticulator is kind of a generic design tool, there are some requirements that it has, and particularly it wants to know the granularity of my data. So when I convert this table into where's the one that I picked?
It came at the very end there. It's the very last. Yeah, it should be the very last
apparently
one.
I called this Paul's 2-measure chart. All right, let's convert that. So you'll see here in the field wells over here that I have to specify the granularity. Well, this particular visual isn't grouped by anything, so there really is no concept of granularity, but it's a requirement for the tool. Therefore, I need to pick something to group by. In this case, I'll just say that I want to use the order date calendar year, because I'm always going to filter by the calendar year. And magically, that was an earlier iteration where I hadn't used the guides. So you can see that, you have to use a little trial and error to get to the right place here. And so more cooking show demo evidence here. So this is a finished version of this that I had created. And then I did some enhancements. I actually kind of took the whole bullet graph concept and I grouped it on another field here with some markers. So you can see that you can kind of get started and then graduate to another place. Now let me jump over to my slides. And well, we did that. That was my placeholder slide to get me there. So you can see that the sky's the limit with these things. So, once you've created a simple glyph, I can add that to a plot segment where I can group it. And then I can also repeat it and create small multiples. And small multiples are not a feature that we have in Power BI today. And but we can do that. We can do multiples and repeated visuals. You can actually repeat an entire chart as a multiple within a grid, horizontally, vertically, or within an actual grid. So now for something completely different. I should have prizes if you can name where that came from. So you'd have to be as old as us, right? All right, so let's do something a little bit more interesting than 2 bars. So I did actually use this in our project. So I just wanted to show you that even though it's not a particularly sexy graphic or sexy chart, it had a use, and we've actually used it in a production solution. Now, in this case, I have data that is grouped by month and then grouped by product category, and I want to aggregate a value. And I'm envisioning, if we could go to the whiteboard right now, I'm envisioning, rather than a standard column chart, I'm envisioning a polar or radial graphic, like a clock, where each month is a place around the clock. I guess that works because there are 12 of those. And so I want to do something that's a little more visually appealing with this. So I'm going to jump over to Charticulator, and big spoiler there where I just showed you the end result. And we're going to go create a new chart. This is going to use this monthly category quantity data. Now, I would have exported that from my table visual, but in the interest of time, there you can see the same data we were looking at in Power BI Desktop. And let's go ahead and dock the glyph editor back so that everything's nice and organized. I'm going to actually start with a rectangular mark. I'm just going to drag and drop that. You can see it snaps to the guides there by default. And I want the height of this mark to be controlled by this field. So you can see that there are little field wells or little placeholders, and I want to place that on top of the height. And already you can see that it's envisioning or preparing to visualize a column chart right here. But I also want to group this mark based on a category. So you can see that there's my field attribute right there. I'm going to grab my category name, drop that onto fill. Now, not only does it vary the color, but it also allows me to stack the different instances of this mark in a variety of different ways. Right now you can see that it's banded, but if I go over here to my plot segment editor, I'll drop this down and I'll say I want to stack it on the y-axis. Oop, that did not, oh, because I haven't put month down there yet. All right, and then I'm going to go put month down on the x-axis, and now I'm getting pretty close to what I'm envisioning. But what I am envisioning is I want to have this radial chart, and I also want to see how data flows from one month to another. So to do that, I'm going to use what's called a link. So let's just click here, and I'm going to be able to, now I'm actually manipulating properties by doing dragging and dropping. If you went down, you'd see that the gap value just changed. That's pretty close to what I wanted. I'm going to click on one of these marks. I'm going to go up to links, and I'm going to use a banded link, and I want this based on my category name, which is the same thing that these marks represent. and magic happens. Now I want to kind of sexy that up just a little bit more. So rather than use a line type link, I'm going to use a Bezier curve. Right, so Bezier just means that it kind of flows and gets some angles put on it. And you can control the curveness of that, but I'm going to just leave it as is. And now I want to create this polar chart. Over here you have what are called scaffolds. And a scaffold is exactly as the name suggests. It's what you put your chart onto. And you can do, right now we have a horizontal scaffold, we can do a vertical scaffold. You can actually draw your own scaffold, so you can actually create like a cityscape or a skyline or a mountain to create a real customized chart. But I'm gonna do this polar scaffold. Just drag and drop that right there, and boom! Now, again, I wanna be cognizant of our time, so I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. Now, if we had more time, what I would do is I would change the background to black. I would change all of my text to white. I'd go adjust things a little bit. I'd put some bound text labels on there. You saw that I did that in the earlier version. And you know, once I've kind of tweaked this and tested it a bit, then I'm going to export it. Now, let's jump back to our cooking show demo. Awesome. Love it when I get an error during a demo. And let's grab the I may need to actually
So a technique that Paul's using here that I'll point out while he's looking for this, if you notice he's hovering over each of the visuals and each visual has a name on it. One of the things Paul has learned in doing this is you want to try and add a version name to the name of the file you're exporting. So if you saw over there was Polar Chart 1, Polar Chart 1.2, and it really helps you if you have multiples of the same thing. The Charticulator app and by similarity, the charts.powerbi.tips as well only exports an icon that is the same for every single visual you export. So there's no customization there at this point. That would be like a new feature type thing. So as a tip or trick, be very clear with your names and likely name them with version numbers in them. So that way, if you have multiple charts in the same file, it's easy to hover each of the visuals and find the specific one that you want.
All right, and finally, notice that I did have to specify the granularity. I'm just kind of holding off on the big reveal here, and that is that when I drag and drop the category name onto my category field, my chart should show up. There it is. In this one, I hadn't adjusted the margins, so you can see that it's kind of small right there. But let's actually just jump over to my finished version over here, where I've kind of tweaked things and hopefully made them a little prettier than this.
So Charticulator by default, Paul was talking earlier about these guides that align the page. So your page area is really the defining perimeter of your visual, and any of these guides have to snap somehow in order to scale or properly size the visual. So a lot of what you're seeing here is, using the glyphs, using the marks, using guides in here is very helpful to get your visual to then show at the appropriate dimensional sizes. There is some very basic properties you can adjust when it's into the Power BI desktop. You can click the paint roller and you can adjust the margin diameter sizes or the number of pixels that you're adjusting there slightly. But most of this, you can adjust it, and we highly recommend if you're using Charticulator with the plan of going to Power BI desktop for reports, is you want to use as many of the guides as you possibly can, and always anchor off the guides provided by the program, or else you get really weird skewed things and it just won't make sense.
Took me a lot of trial and error to figure that out.
Same.
Yeah.
This tip right here will save you hours of effort if you just use some of these guides.
Guides are your friend.
They are your friend.
And I didn't find a lot of documentation around the
there's not
the axis.
Yep.
What is that called? The axis scale.
The scale axis, yes.
Though it's pretty easy to figure out. Anyway, yeah, all good advice. So anyway, you'll have access to these slides, and again, this is just a summary of essentially what I've done here. Another thing that did take me a while to kind of figure out is that the labels here on the outside of of my stacked rectangles, and I refer to these as rectangles, but in a polar scaffold, they end up with these angled shapes. But the text out here are actually tick labels. So the idea is that you end up with this little marker. We've already used the word mark to mean something else, but you think about it, a tick, it's just a little segmented line, and then there's a label, so we call it tick labels. So again, it had to kind of fish for that quite a bit. All right, so well, since we're talking about programming, and Ronan, I did actually add this slide to the deck, and we'll update the deck for download. What I wanted to show you is the actual code that Charticulator generates. And if you actually look at the file that it generates, it has a PBI viz extension. And if you add a .zip extension to the end of that, you can actually extract all of that. And so what you'll see inside is, right there, is you'll see a package.json file. That's just metadata descriptors. It's a very lightweight file. There's a resources folder. And then inside the resources folder, there's this it uses the name that you gave it along with a GUID at the end. That's a big JSON file that I have open here. And so you'll see, and I've prettied this up a little bit just in Notepad++ using one of the add-ins. But so you'll see all of the attributes and properties describing all of the objects that you created. And down here, you'll see this JS element. And if we go and extract that and pretty it up, you will see literally, and this is just the 2-bar chart, that really simple chart that I created.
There's a lot of custom code. So the
4,000 lines of JavaScript.
Yes. So if you think about the tool, right? So the tool can do any number of things. There's a bunch of generic functions that are trying to execute just drawing you some bars. You may draw 1 bar, but you may need to execute numbers or thousands of data points on a particular page. These functions to be able to handle all of that. This has all been pre-coded from the Microsoft team to then extrapolate down these open source d3.js libraries into an actual visual that Power BI can read.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. And I had a question come up in an earlier session. Could I use this as a starting point to roll my own? And my answer is, what, knock yourself out. But it's
you could.
You would need to have a lot of time on your hands to figure that out.
So there's a place definitely for like custom visuals in general, just building straight custom code. I know there's a lot of MVPs that are doing mapping activities. One of the things that this tool is not very good at.
James Daly's done such a fantastic job with.
Excellent. Yep. And I would say this tool is not really for that. However, where I think Charticulator serves a really good purpose is there's some nuanced pieces around charting. And maybe I need some extra glyphs. Maybe I need a transparency. So for example, you have a scatter chart and you want to change the opacity of each bubble. The opacity is not an option inside Power BI Desktop today as it stands. So if you need additional slight feature changes on a chart, Charticulator seems to be a really good function to fit those areas to give you more highly customized, nuanced versions of your charts.
Yeah, good point. Well, this is a good transition point to turn the time over to you, Mike. So I'm going to let you jump off here.
Sure.
And present your demos.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the Ronan and team. I'm going to move over to try and present my desktop. So if you wouldn't mind, let's transfer presentation power over to me if we can. So what I'm going to walk through is I'm going to walk through some of the visuals that I've done. So Paul's done a really good job of summarizing the tool. One of the things that he noted was that we don't have a really good capability to be able to build a lot of documentation around this. It's kind of it's there in Charticulator at some level, but sometimes you just need workable demos. So this kind of is where Power BI.tips is filling that need. The Charticulator project is an open source project on GitHub, so I forked my own version and keep up to date versions with what Microsoft is doing. But essentially, I've done a number of other elaborate visuals built by the community.
And I just wanted to check and see if have you been switched to presenter, or do I need to do that?
No, I can switch. Do you want me to switch to you, Mike?
Yep,
okay.
I think something just came up. Let me know if you can see my screen.
I actually see it now, Mike.
All right, so let's get rid of this guy out of here. I don't want to click cancel because I don't know what that's going to do. All right, if I can minimize this guy as well. Get out of here. Okay, so jumping over to the demo piece here. So I do want to pick up right away from the Charticulator piece. So I'm going to the website, charts.powerbi.tips. So this is where we are hosting a version of this program. Things are essentially exactly looking the same way at Charticulator. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up a custom visual, and we're just going to walk through this other visual. So,
and if I can interrupt really quick, on the theme of open source, I think that probably means two things in terms of this presentation. One is that Charticulator generates code that can easily be shared, and I don't know if that necessarily qualifies under the definition of open source, but the Charticulator project itself is open source.
correct.
It's available in GitHub for you to branch, and that's exactly what Mike has done on his site.
So the reason why I did this, and this is kind of a little bit of a background here, is I'm really interested in sharing this really rich work that people are doing. So I actually have joined with the website, I actually have a gallery that attaches to it. And so this is the charts gallery. So essentially this is where I'm putting the documentation, I'm teaching people how to do things. So here I have how to build a custom visual bar chart. There'll be more documentation here added all the time. I actually have a featured list. So these are a couple featured of viz files you can automatically download. These are things that I have produced or have been produced by the community. A couple of these dot scatter plots were produced by a gentleman by the name of Nick Snap, who does a really amazing job on visuals. So here's a page or homage to Nick Snap. Here he is on Twitter. Follow him at nsnap, but he's produced all these visuals and then I've been able to host them and share them with the site. So again, to kind of give people some familiarity around how to build their own visuals. So back over to the tool, here's a custom visual that I have built. So essentially, I'm gonna give you a basic read through what this looks like. This is data by state. So I have states here in the middle of the page. We're looking at the crime rate or a crime incidence over here on the left-hand side, and we have a incidents related to drugs on the other hand side. So we can see kind of state by state, what is that comparison? And what you'll note here is in the middle of the chart, we actually have like a bar chart graph. And so we can compare the two different types of data points against each other. But then you also see that we have these, and Paul said it right, I don't know how to say it, Béziers.
Bézier.
Béziers, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know how to say it right. So thanks, Paul. So you can see I'm attaching these lines to data points on the right-hand side here. So to see very briefly how it's built, I actually built some blocks on the page. So these are my shapes here that I'm using to block out some areas. And then as I highlight this left-handed drug size here, this is actually a scale that I put on the plot area. So I can actually adjust the scale and move it to different positions, and you can see how all the elements are being pulled together. So you can go back here and there's my full scale limit. You can turn off things with the little eyeball, is what I did here for aligning various elements. There's a lot going on in this chart, and there's a full demo of this on our YouTube channel, so powerbi.tips on YouTube. I walk you through step by step on how we did this entire visual. So essentially what I do want to show you is kind of, the baking show element here. Let's show you how you get this out. So I already have the visual built. If I click the export button, I've limited the amount of options here, and let's be realistic here. If you're building visuals, we really want to build them for Power BI desktop, so that's why I've removed the other options. You can't export it as HTML. I'm trying to hone in on a very specific use case for Power BI. So if you click the button here, it allows you to adjust a bunch of properties. Some of the things I will point out here are the axis and scales. So if you can see here kind of in the gray area, I have at the top of my charts, I have 60 as the top range. And then at the bottom of my charts, I have 0 down here at the very end. So the reason I'm doing this is because I really do want to show similar scales between both of them. If I didn't, I let it auto scale, it'll auto scale this other axis here on the right-hand side, and I'll lose my aspect ratio between the two data points. So what I do here is you can actually turn off the auto scaling for certain things here. So for the drugs axis on the left side, I turn that off. And for the traffic axis on the right side, I can turn these off. So basically what this does is this locks in my data points from 0 to 60 on my linear axes that I have on the left and right hand side. We would then click the Export Custom Visual. It then packages up this visual and then downloads it to my machine. So
something that has been a little bit a peeve of mine in the tool is that every time you export, it doesn't persist those settings. It doesn't remember them, and you have to go through and make these changes every time you do an export.
So then I'll open up my desktop here. So I will bring up the charts.ribbon.pbi viz file. And then what we'll be able to see from here is we'll have the same data set that we were working with in Charticulator, and we're doing the same steps that Paul was alluding to earlier, loading a data set, bringing the information in, and then having the data populate. So here I have a predefined data set, and then I'll import our visual, same thing. We'll click on the ellipsis up here in the right-hand corner, import from file, and I've already pre-downloaded one. So I have this ribbons final visual. I'll hit open. It'll tell me my visual has been imported. I'll click it to add it to my desktop screen. I'll make it large here so we have some space to work with it. And then earlier, we provide the granularity. So the data that I have is at the granularity at the state level. So this is the lowest level of data that I have. And then I will add the state level to the state details on the state column, and then add my other columns here. And then you'll note once we're done, our chart will redraw. And then you get full interactivity with this chart just like you would normally. So then I can actually look at a couple things here and say if I wanted to sort distribution-wise for this particular visual, it's sorting by the information in the drugs column. I can also sort by state name. So then it can sort by state name, and then you get this nice arrayed chart here. And so usually you can look this, where's my anomalies, right? So, West Virginia here has a much higher value than other states in this area. You can also use slicers on the page to then manipulate these visuals. It acts just like a normal visual. So if I click on the Midwest, it'll then pare down my data to the Midwest region or the Northeast or the South. And you can basically see, the neat part about this particular visual is I'm looking at different distributions here. So I can see on the incidence by drugs here on the left-hand side, there's a larger distribution, and there's actually an outlier here over at West Virginia compared to traffic. In the traffic incidence area, we have a much tighter distribution of data points here on the right-hand side. So real quick visual demonstration of this one, importing another custom visual that was built there. Again, all of these details and information can be found on the Charticulator or charts.powerbi.tips site. There's a lot of documentation and downloadable PDFs there as well that we make available. And then also I have another visual to demo. Another visual that you can't really do inside Power BI is clustering things together, a cluster matrix. So here's another visual. I'm going to add this one here. Similar process, we would then go to the website, build it, put the visual in. And so now if I add my details, so for this one I have an index as my granularity, my lowest details. For this one, I'm using mushroom data. So is this mushroom editable or not? This is actually right from the Charticulator website that we demoed. So the idea here is I have an XY scale axis with 2-dimensional characteristics. This is also something you can't quite do in Power BI Desktop. The XY scatter plot does not like to do dimensions on the X and Y directions. It only likes to do dimensions on the X-axis and then numerical numbers on the Y-axis. But then again, everything here is also editable modified by the filters. If I click on edits, you can see the editable items are there in these different areas and which one is poisonable or not poisonous based on mushroom types. So again, just another visual type that you can see how it's made here in the desktop and brought in. Again, these are all YouTube hosted videos, and here's the chart and how it looks inside the chart builder. So you can adjust the size here, it will adjust the frame for you, and then you have all the different chart elements on the page as well. So I know we're kind of right at time. The only thing I would point out is if you want more information about the details here, and I'll kick this back over to you, Paul.
Sure.
You can continue at this time since we already answered all the questions.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad that we've answered all the questions.
So just take another 5 minutes if you want.
So, well, and a couple of important points. Mike mentioned that these charts are interactive, And I think an important takeaway is that custom visuals are built on the same framework as standard visuals in Power BI. It actually is exactly the same thing. And if we back up a little bit, something that is very unique about Power BI is that everything is HTML5 and JavaScript.
Correct.
Even within Power BI Desktop, the design experience is actually an instance of the Chromium browser, which is just an extremely efficient JavaScript and HTML5 renderer. So that when you click on an element in whether it's a standard visual or a custom visual generated with the Charticulator tool, that visual is in fact a slicer, and it filters other data in the same report page interactively. That's what Power BI was designed to do, and I think that that's a lot of its value, is that it's highly interactive. You can create very interesting visualizations using R script or using Python, and that's great, but those visuals render raster graphics, which means that they're not interactive. So even though you can do some really interesting things with R, with code that perhaps you copy and paste, you can't get this level of interaction that you would get with a custom visual.
And there's a number of other resources. I think, Paul, you have another slide there. I don't know if you can, are you able to present again? So there's, again, with learning a new tool and adding this into Power BI Desktop, there's a little bit of a learning curve, particularly with this one. I mean, this is really meeting the need for some of these more elaborate build tools. So for this chart here, the demo for the clustered scatter chart, if you go to Power BI Tips, More Resources, the Microsoft Business Application Summit 2019, we have a full PDF document describing all the buttons, all the items about Charticulator, what they mean, what are they used for, documentation there, and there's actually build instructions specifically for all of the two charts that you saw. So for the scatter chart and the ribbon chart, both instructions are step-by-step built out there for you, so you can add those and make them on your own time to start learning how you could use Charticulator to enhance your own Power BI reports.
Yeah, I mentioned that on the Charticulator site, there are some videos and there's actually some content that may be useful. Let me jump over to my web browser here. So if we go back to Charticulator, to the actual Charticulator site, let me just go there. There is a gallery that will show you some examples of charts that you can build, and there are videos, but these are not walkthrough videos. They're not demonstrations. It's really just kind of a silent showcase that will kind of give you ideas of what you can do, but it's not a step-by-step tutorial, which Mike and Nick and others have done on the Power BI Tips site. Some other things that you'll find available through this site. The Microsoft research folks had actually written a white paper. As you can see, it's 11 pages. So it's deep, but again, it's really a showcase. It's not a complete expose of every single property and every single mechanism within the Charticulator designer. Mike, you've actually fleshed out the documentation a little more thoroughly than this, I believe.
Yeah, so the documentation provided by the resource link, I think that was on that previous slide. If you go to Power BI Tips, we have a full documentation there, and there'll be more documentation as we learn it, right? So as we build our own visuals and go through the walkthroughs, yeah, here, this page. So to get to the charts that I've rendered through our site, it's chart.powerbi.tips. If you want to go download other theme or other visuals that you want to have, you can go to gallery.powerbi.tips. That's where you'll find all the other visuals that we can download, and we're looking to light Paul up here with some demos as well and get his own section of the website so he can, demo some additional things here.
I'll get on that, Mike.
Yeah, send me your materials, Paul. We'll host it for you.
Mike, Paul, you can copy the links to the chat if you want, so people will be able to copy paste it directly.
Sure.
Can I copy here? Will that work? I don't know if I can do that readily.
It'll be in the presentation download. You can click them from there, I believe.
The deck will be available to download. I believe that it is now, so you can copy and paste it out of the PDF.
There's also some, one of the lead developers, Bongxi Ling, is the individual who's really building out this entire tool. Is kind of her vision about how this is going to work. So here's a video also from YouTube about her explaining the tool, how it's renders and how to build some visuals there. You have the charts gallery, how to use the charts gallery, and then Paul pointed out there the research paper from the development team. Really good materials there. And then there are also materials for the session. I think Paul also has materials there at tinyurl, Charticulator demos. Those are the ones that he was producing. And then the more resources, MBASH 2019. It's a downloadable zip file with files, Power BI files, the Viz files, instructions, more documentation, PDFs in there as well. So you have a lot of things, resources at your fingertips. Any one of these areas, you could just jump in and start learning how you can build your own custom visuals with no code.
All right. Well, so we're going to do something remarkable for an event like this, and we're going to actually wrap up a couple minutes early. So,
We don't have questions
Ronan,
now.
I'll turn the time over to you.
You have a good feedback from people. You don't have open question right now. So very nice and impressive.
We did so good. We don't have any questions.
Yeah, well, and thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. This was an honor to present.
Good luck. Have fun making custom visuals.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Paul and Mike. It was awesome session. I know that I learned a lot, and I saw the feedback on the chat. So I know that other people love this presentation. Please, everyone, stay tuned for our next session. How you can keep your SQL code protected with Git, presented by Giovanni Hernandez. And thank you all for attending the meeting this past marathon.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys,
Hope to see you out there in the community.
Thank you.
Sorry.